Have you ever stopped to think about what's actually happening in your head when you decide something is right or wrong? It feels like it's just instinct, right? But there's a whole fascinating science behind our moral choices. So let's dive into the psychology of our own inner compass.
So, to kick things off, we're not going to start with some dry theory. Nope, we're going to jump right into a problem. It's a classic ethical dilemma, one that's really challenged thinkers for decades. And I want you to put yourself right in the middle of this situation.
Okay, picture this. A woman is on the verge of death from a really specific type of cancer. Now, there's a drug out there that could save her. A local druggist discovered it, but he's charging a fortune for it, 10 times what it actually costs him to make. Her husband, Heinz, scrambles. He raises all the money he possibly can, but it's still only half the price. He goes to the druggist, he pleads with him, asks to buy it cheaper or pay the rest later. The druggist just says no.
So, what do you do? Should Heinz steal the drug? There's no clean, easy answer here, is there? And for psychologists, the really fascinating part isn't just what you decide. It's the why. Your reasoning for that choice, well, that reveals a ton about how your moral mind is wired.
And that question, that why behind our choices, that's exactly what researchers have spent years trying to map out. They've actually come up with frameworks to understand how we grow from being simple rule followers into people who can grapple with complex ethical ideas.
A huge piece of this puzzle comes from a psychologist named Lawrence Kohlberg. His big idea was that our moral logic isn't something we're just born with. It evolves. We actually move through these predictable stages of moral development, kind of like how we learn to crawl, then walk, then run. Kohlberg basically broke it down into 3 main levels. First, when we're kids, we're at the pre-conventional level. It's all about avoiding punishment. Don't do it, because you'll get in trouble. Simple. Then we move into the conventional level. Here, we start to care about social norms, fitting in, and keeping society running smoothly. And then, some of us, he argued, eventually reach the post-conventional level, where our morality is guided by these big, abstract principles, like justice and human rights, even if they conflict with the law.
So how do you even measure something like that? Well, one of the go-to tools is called the Defining Issues Test, or DIT for short. It'll give you dilemmas, just like the one about Heinz, and then it analyzes the reasoning you use to make your choice. And based on that, it can get a sense of which of Kohlberg's stages you tend to operate from.
But here's the thing. Measuring morality isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. The DIT, for instance, is really focused on your preference. Do you prefer arguments about law and order, or do you lean towards arguments about universal rights? Another tool, the Moral Judgment Test, looks at something different, consistency. It's checking to see if you apply your ethical principles the same way across different situations, or if you kind of change your logic depending on the context. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Our moral compass, it's not just some cold, logical calculator in our heads. It's also deeply emotional, totally intuitive. Sometimes a decision just feels right or feels wrong, and we only figure out the logic for it later.
This is where a fascinating idea called moral foundations theory comes into play. It suggests that our morality is built on these core intuitions, almost like we have different taste buds for the ethical world. We all have a strong reaction to caring versus harming someone, or fairness versus cheating. But the theory also points to other taste buds, like loyalty to your group, respect for authority, and even a sense of purity or sanctity.
And it's not just about logic versus emotion. Research highlights this third, absolutely critical factor: stress. Our moral compass does not operate in a vacuum. Work from researchers like Norma Han shows that how we respond to pressure right in the heat of the moment can completely hijack our usual way of thinking about right and wrong. Our ability to cope can literally change what we do.
And what that really proves is that morality isn't just some abstract idea you debate in a classroom. It's forged in the fire. It gets tested in these high-stakes, high-pressure situations. And that's where the real test truly begins. I mean, just think about the workplace. Companies use what are called situational judgment tests to try and figure out how you'd handle a real-world problem. Imagine your boss comes to you and says, "Hey, can you just tweak these numbers a little on the report? It'll make the whole team look better." What do? These tests are designed to see if your compass points true north when the pressure is on.
So, that's a tough spot at work. But what happens when the pressure is dialed up to 11? When it's literally a matter of life and death, and the right answer is anything but clear?
Get this. A survey in the U.S. military found something pretty staggering. Less than half, less than 50% of soldiers or Marines said they would report a member of their own team for unethical behavior. The gut instinct for many is to handle it inside the group, to protect the unit, even if that means bending or breaking the official rules.
And when people in these high-stressed fields are forced to make these impossible choices, it can lead to something called moral injury. Now, this is different from PTSD. This is a deep psychological wound that comes from doing something or seeing something that violates your own core moral beliefs. It's this soul-crushing feeling that maybe you're not a good person anymore.
So how do you possibly prepare someone for that? Well, the military learned that you can't just lecture people about ethics in a classroom. It has to be trained, like a muscle. They use these incredibly intense, realistic drills that force soldiers to actually rehearse making moral decisions under extreme stress. The idea is that when the real moment comes, that muscle memory kicks in.
And this whole challenge of teaching ethics under pressure is now moving to the next frontier. We're going from training humans to programming machines. How in the world do you code a moral compass into artificial intelligence, especially when it might have to make a split-second life-or-death decision?
Well, the first step is data. Tons and tons of it. You might have heard of the moral machine experiment. It gathered millions of human decisions on different versions of that classic trolley problem. And this huge data set, with all of its messy human biases and preferences, basically becomes the textbook that these AIs learn ethics from.
And what's really wild is that different AI models start to develop their own moral personalities. For example, when faced with a dilemma, an AI named Mistral almost always chooses to intervene, to pull the lever, so to speak. But another one, QN, does the exact opposite. It has a strong tendency not to act. They've developed their own ethical instincts based on the data they were fed.
But this is the part that should really make you stop and think. Researchers gave these AIs a little prompt, basically telling them to adopt the persona of a certain nationality, and their ethical judgments went completely haywire. Just look at Quen. When it was told to think like it was French, its tendency to step in and act dropped by over 70%. This shows a massive danger, and AI's ethics aren't objective. They're just a mirror reflecting all the hidden biases and cultural stereotypes in the data we train them on.
Okay, so from a classic thought experiment all the way to the code inside an AI, we've seen just how complex and messy morality really is. So let's bring all of this back home, back to you and to your own internal moral operating system. If there's one key takeaway, it's this. Your sense of right and wrong isn't some fixed trait carved in stone. It's more like a dynamic, complex skill. It's a constant negotiation between your logical brain, your gut feelings, your cultural programming, and, of course, the pressure of whatever situation you find yourself in.
And think about that for a second. If morality is a skill, just like playing an instrument or a sport, that means it can be developed, it can be practiced, it can be improved. So the final question isn't just about what you believe is right, but what you're actively doing to get better at making those choices. How will you practice?